Okay, what the skibbity heck is going on with this here graph? What's all these circles doing? How come some of them are bigger than others? Some of them are smaller than others? What do these connections mean? Well, today we're going to explain so that you don't have to think about it very hard. Let's start with auth left. What's going on auth left with a bunch of circles here? What is authoritarian leftism? It's fundamentally this idea that one centralized entity is going to enforce equality across a large swath of entities. So here we have one big circle that represents the dictatorship of the proletariat, or Stalin, or whatever you want to call it, that is enforcing equality across many disparate groups. And so because of this one centralized state or force or whatever, that's the authoritarian part of it, everyone is basically forced to be equal. That's the authoritarian left way. On the authoritarian right, we have something similar, right? We have that big circle. That means that there is one centralized authority. But in this case, the centralized authority isn't a dictatorship of the proletariat that's enforcing equality. In fact, there's an even more complicated hierarchy below it. What's it really doing is it's kind of enforcing hierarchy. So whereas auth left is enforcing equality, auth right is using authority to enforce a hierarchy. But it's keeping the natural hierarchies as they are, or maybe even accentuating them. And you can imagine this as like maybe a king. Monarchy, one archy. Ever think about that? Yeah, that's what monarchy means. So like a monarch in this case doesn't have to be like a literal king. It's just someone who has complete centralized power within themselves. Like for example, if a president can SEAL Team 6 his political rivals and has all of the power concentrated into him with no checks or balances, you might call that a monarchy. Interesting. So yeah, there's these hierarchies that go underneath, and the hierarchies are infinitely complex. As an example, what if this big circle was the clergy, and then this was like lesser priests, and then these were like the churchgoers, your sinners, the smaller ones. Maybe this is the mercantilists over here, and maybe they have their own hierarchy and their own systems of power. And really, they're all reporting to the king. They're all reporting to the monarch. And that monarch has the absolute power, but they're using that power not to enforce equality like auth left is, but rather to reinforce the hierarchy and sometimes bring some spiritual meaning to the hierarchy, because often, the king has a spiritual link with God or whatever. You can view this as also like, I don't know, Pinochet. You could view that as like a statist, authoritarian, capitalist government that's just kind of like getting rid of these people mostly, so that they can keep their hierarchies going and keep justifying them. On the left libertarian quadrant, though, we have a whole different story. What's going on here? There's so many different circles, and they're all hanging out with each other, and they're all the same size. Exactly. They're all the same size, and they don't need this big circle to enforce them to be the same size. And instead, what happens is they interface rhizomatically. Rhizomatically. What does that word mean? It's a term invented by Deleuze and Guattari, who basically said that things can connect to other things. I could say more words about that. That's basically all that means. All these different nodes, there are connections between the nodes, and then the connections just sort of form organically. No one has to be like, I'm going to make you form these connections now so that things don't get out of line. No, these connections just happen. Maybe this guy's making bread for this guy because he's friends with that guy. Maybe this guy is building a house for this guy because he just wants to build a house, and maybe this guy who's getting the house built for him is performing sexual favors for that guy. Yeah, this also describes a polycule. You could see this as a web of sexually transmitted diseases. So make of that what you will. But yes, this is rhizomatic because nobody needs a centralized authority to tell them to be equal. The idea here is in a left libertarian society, everyone would just be equal. Libertarian right. What's going on here? There's a bunch of different sized blobs. It's agario. And if the question here is, will these bigger blobs just agario all the smaller blobs and make one huge blob, which one then just becomes this? Up for debate. But in this case, this is like, maybe this is like the state of Amazon after Amazon buys like the entire Midwest or something. And the entire state of Amazon is like trading with the state of Walmart, and it's also stating with a micronation of Swaznia or whatever the crypto bros are doing with their islands. And you can view this as network states. These are individual states, groups of people or entities or corporations, whatever, that are doing trade with each other voluntarily. So These are people who are interfacing with each other. Maybe these people have good trade relations with this very small nation, or maybe they're just kind of like exploiting that nation through trade and stealing all their resources. So the connections are also sort of made organically, but in a more hierarchical way. This is kind of two different hypotheses about how decentralization would work. In one hypothesis, the decentralization makes for a more fair and equitable and just society. And in this world, it doesn't. It kind of, resources accumulate on the top. And that's natural, and we don't need the king enforcing this hierarchy. This hierarchy will form naturally, and we don't need to connect it to God. No gods, no masters. BioShock time. I don't know. So yeah, that's all what the circles mean. Now you don't have to think about it anymore. I posted this on Twitter though, and someone sent me this for the centrist. I don't like this one at all.